Welcome back. Next in our project is to build our pfSense virtual machine, which is our firewall. A couple things that we're going to need to do that is we're going to need the build guide. We're going to need to reference that for specifications on RAM, CPU, what data store, network cards, and so on. And we're going to need the pfSense installation ISO, which we should already have. We should have that in our ISO library over on our NFS data store. Another thing that we're going to need is we're going to need to know our IP addresses. Let's go over here. If I come down and I find myself here, the ones that I'm particularly interested in are, notice up here at the top it says that those are for PF1 for the WAN interface. Now it's a firewall, so it's going to have a WAN interface that'll connect to the internet. It's going to have a LAN interface that'll connect to CorpNet. So I find my assigned addresses here. Okay, there I am. And the two that I'm particularly interested in then are these two. And as you notice here, each of us has our own assigned values. Okay, so I've got that in my notes. If I come back to my notes here, you can see that these are particular for me. Your values will be different. These two values will be different. And then also on CorpNet, we all have a different network ID for CorpNet. Okay, so down here again, I look for me, and my CorpNet is a 192.168.18 network, and for IPv6 CorpNet has a network ID of that, FF18:::. So I'm going to need those pieces of information. If we now go look at our diagram here, what we're saying then is that we can plug in those values. And we need that. The internet side is going to become the WAN interface, the values for the WAN interface, and CorpNet will become the values that we assign for the LAN interface. Okay. Now pfSense is installed in two parts. Part 1 is from the console, and then part 2 is done through a web interface, much like ESXi. ESXi, you sit down and you install it at the machine, and at the console there's it's pretty basic, and then after you've done that part of the installation, then you go to a computer that has a web browser. You open a web browser, you connect to it by a web browser, and then you continue the installation. And that's the same with pfSense. And so I'm going to use my Windows 10 machine for that. Let's go ahead and get started then. Before I actually do, I want to check one thing. The build guide says that I need 16 gigabytes of thick provisioned storage on data store 1, and I just want to be sure I've got that. So I'm up here looking at data store 1, and there's my key value there. It's a really fast hard drive. That's our fastest hard drive. That's the NVMe drive, but it's not very big. But I do have enough space for pfSense. 16 gig isn't a lot of space compared to like installing Windows, but that's a pretty good size for pfSense. Let's go ahead then and build a virtual machine. FreeBSD 12. Okay. Does that look good? All right, let's continue. Data store 1, that's correct. We need 2 CPU. We need 4 gigabytes of RAM. We need 2 network cards. Okay, we've got network adapter 1. I'm going to go ahead and move network adapter 1 over to the internet. And I'm going to go then and add my other network card. And it shows up on CorpNet. I'm going to need to attach the installation ISO. Okay, so I've got data store ISO connected, power on connected, and the installation ISO. Oh, it didn't keep my 4 gigabytes there. Okay. Oh, and it didn't get 16 there. That this could be my fault. We'll come back and check this before we actually do the install. So there it is in my list, and let's do that. Let's just go in and edit the settings. Okay, 4 gigabytes of RAM, 2 CPU, 16 gigabyte. Let's verify that it's thick provisioned and on data store 1. Okay, that looks good. I want to show you something here on the network cards that we'll need later. If I expand the network cards, I want you to notice that they don't yet have a MAC address assigned to them. Once we power on the virtual machine, they'll get a MAC address, but they don't yet have it. And we're going to need to know the MAC address as part of the installation because we need to know which network card to configure as being connected to the internet and which one is being connected to CorpNet. Okay, I was looking at my data store ISO, and I need to go ahead and connect that. Okay, connected power on. Okay. All right. I think we're ready to go ahead and boot the virtual machine. Most of the installation goes pretty quickly. I'm not able to do anything here. I mean, I could have interrupted the installation and interjected drivers, and there's a second time during the installation at the end when you can do the same, when you can go in and add any additional drivers or such that are needed. And but we're pretty much a straightforward installation until we get to the configuration of the IP addresses. Okay, let's see if I can go full screen on this. All right, give you a chance to see it. If you haven't installed pfSense before, then this is going to be very meaningful to you. If you have, feel free to work ahead, and if you're comfortable with all this, there are a few things that I noticed that are different in this most recent build. First time through, it's good to pay attention to the screens. Here we're configuring what keyboard we're going to be using. Okay. Here it's asking us about the file system. This is one of the things that has changed as we go through different versions of BSD, FreeBSD. ZFS has now become the default, not default, but I guess default, but preferred file system for newer Linux, newer BSD. That has a lot of really cool features. A lot of the different platforms are switching over to ZFS for the file system. The auto ZFS, what it'll do there is it'll take whatever size hard drive that we've allocated to it, and it'll partition it as it sees best for pfSense. Just like with Linux, Linux will do the same thing. We do our Linux install, but you could also go other options here, guided and so on, where you can influence what it's going to do. And but I'm happy, especially since we're just getting started with pfSense, I'm happy with letting it go ahead and auto partition it for me. Okay, proceed with installation. Okay, another ZFS question here. And here I do need to press the space bar to go ahead and select DA0. Did you notice that? See the space bar there is putting the asterisk in front of the DA0. That's a Linux Unix reference. You'll see that like we're going to look at the network cards, and they're going to be well, yeah, you'll see it. I'll show it to you. They're just, you get used to them, but they're common in the Linux and Unix community. Are you sure you want to destroy the current contents of DA0? And we have to now arrow over and choose yes. And now it's going to start the installation. I did pause the video, but it wasn't for very long. And here is that choice I was telling you where it says, would you like to open a shell before it reboots? And the default is no, and I'm good with that. So go ahead and hit enter on that. It's going to now reboot. When it reboots, it's going to then come back in and continue on with the installation. We're still in the console phase of it, and in the next part of the installation is where we'll assign IP addresses to the network card. Network cards, plural. I'll show you a couple other things there, and then we'll be done with the console side of it. This is off my screen here, so I'm going to go ahead and back out of it a little bit. What you couldn't see was down here where it said should you do VLANs, and we're going to choose no. Okay, so this is what I was telling you about, how we need to know the MAC address for each of our network cards, because decisions are going to be made here about which network card is tied to the WAN interface or internet facing and which one is tied to the LAN interface. So if I come up here up higher, I want you to notice it here that the designation for the network cards is VMX0, VMX1. And what I want to do is pay attention to the last part of the MAC address, and I want to make note of that. Okay, so I've got those values now, and what I do is I go into the settings of the virtual machine, and I go down to the network card, and since we've powered it on, we'll now have values for these network cards. So first of all, I want to pay attention to that. The one I'm going to look at here is connected to my virtual switch internet, and that's 05. So I'm looking at my notes here, and that's VMX005, and I'm making a note to myself that that's the internet. Now it goes, kind of through process of elimination or deduction here, then that the network card 2 would be the other one, OF, and it is, but I'm just going to make a note of that's CorpNet. Okay. So now knowing that information here, it's asking me to enter the WAN interface name, and it tells me down here at the bottom that what it's looking for is either VMX0, VMX1, or A for auto configure. So what I want to do is I want to type in VMX0. See, well, how did you know that, Randy? It's because I went up here and I took that MAC address. Okay, I took that, I went into the settings of the virtual, and it told me that that particular network card was connected to the internet. Okay, so internet equals WAN, and then LAN is equivalent to CorpNet in our drawing. I think, okay, you just need a refresher on that. Let's go take a quick look here. Okay, so here we go. So over here we've got WAN, and over here we've got LAN. Okay. Now the great thing about everything that we're doing here is that kind of a no harm, no foul. If things go sideways, no problem, delete the virtual and recreate it. When we were installing ESXi and stuff, if we made a mistake, there was some times where we had to like back up and do some stuff. But here we're dealing with virtuals, and so if it doesn't go well, just delete it and recreate it. Okay, enter the LAN interface and VMX1. Same reasoning was applied. I look at the MAC address. I go into settings for the virtual. I see that the MAC address ending in 0F is tied to CorpNet. Okay. So now it's verifying that for me. WAN and LAN, is that correct? And I'll say yes, that's correct. Okay. Now at this point, I am going to pause the video. This takes a couple of minutes, and so don't know that so that you won't panic. All right. What it's doing now is it's trying to do DHCP. I'm going to see if I can go full screen again here. It's trying to do DHCP off of both interfaces, and it waits until it times out. Okay, it made it through the DHCP waits, and it's, yeah, I know, my bottom of my screen isn't being captured in the video, and so you're not actually seeing the very bottom here. But it's going to come up in a minute with this. Let me go ahead and go out of full screen. Okay, there you can see. Get it a little bigger. Okay. What we're going to do here is I'm going to wrap up this video. This is this is when you boot pfSense. This is where it always winds up. So if you were on a physical box and you went up to the console and you looked at it, this is what you would see. And from here you can do quite a bit of stuff. But what we're going to do next is we're going to over here we're going to look at options. We're going to do this here. We're going to set interface IP addresses, but we'll do that in a different video. If we needed to change which network card was internet and which network card was CorpNet, we would do that with option number 1. If we need to halt the system, shut her down, number 6, we can do ping, we can reboot with number 5. Yeah, you kind of get the idea here. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to wrap up this video, and we'll come back in, and I'll see if I can get a full screen on it, and we'll walk through the IP address settings, and then that's all we're going to do here. That's all that's left to do, is to set our values. If you look right up here, now you'll see here's WAN and here's LAN, and it defaulted to DHCP and it pre-assigned this. So we're going to change all that. We're going to use the values that are appropriate for our network, and I'll show you how to do that in the next video. All right, I'll see you in a few.